Love is not a story. I wish it were, to be honest. I wish I could just say, this happened, and that happened, then love, then something else happened, which only happened because love happened previously. My eyes are still closed, stuck with sleep, but I can sense that it's getting light out. I'm not sure what time it is. Either it's absurdly early, like 5:30, or I've slept in. I hope it's on the 5:30 side, so I can avoid a lot of pointless guilt. At any rate, I have to go to the bathroom, which means I have to open my eyes, which means I have to look at the clock. I return, weave back down the hall, feel for the door jamb, and then, with effort, mentally plot a course towards the bed. What was that dream again? Just beyond my fingertips, at the tip of my tongue, a millimeter past the edge of daylight. The Terminator? Oh, good word, Terminator. Not night, not day, just the end of everything. I know you're there, barely on the corner of the bed. That way you sit, barefoot and ankles crossed, your hands folded in your lap. Your hands, not perfect hands, maybe not even elegant hands, but strong and capable and ready to weave music out of thin air. You look over your shoulder at me, or my pillow where you expect me to be. It is light enough that I can see the 1,000 silvery angles of your hair of no color and every color, falling over your shoulder and down. Of course, I'm not in bed. I'm behind you, standing in the doorway. But you see me asleep still. You have come to wake me up. And that's how I remember again, for the zillionth time, that I am lost. You turn your head, and there's nothing there. A featureless void, memory run dry. No more your eyes, the color of which I, as a lunk-headed male, could never remember. No more your fine aquiline nose. And didn't we laugh about that description after our trip to Lombardy? No inscrutable smile that would make Leonardo weep. It was your face that did me in, you know, the part that died first. I know why you are here. Of course I do. You've come to my bed to kiss me awake, to summon me. You have already been up for an hour practicing, haven't you? Oh, I know this piece. I know the music. We are old friends, this music, and you and me. But God damn it! And now, startled, I remember my interrupted dream. It's been a long time. It's Brahms, isn't it? Isn't it? Time for our walk. It's fucking god-awful hot out. The blood of old men runs thin, and like the cold-blooded lizards sunning themselves on desert rocks, we need the sun to bring us back to life. Except I'm not a lizard. My aging process must have gone awry, and I stumble in the heat. You are the one who prays to that fiery orb, a daughter of the light. And I forgot my hat. So we walk. I am 1.5 steps behind you, as always. We never stroll in the woods, or by the lake, or on the beach, or in the mountains. We only travel the suburban sidewalks, concrete or occasionally brick where someone has opted for a more elegant frontage. The air is vibrating in the heat, turning the next block into a shimmering liquid horizon. We pass the big new gray house on the left, and I try to imagine how many bathrooms it has, and if each bathroom has a designer sink with a chrome spigot and pure white towels, since people who live in houses like that would never tolerate floral embroidery. I am still behind you as we linger in front of the funky brown house covered in some climatically inappropriate stucco. Next, the faux farmhouse with white siding and black shutters, and garden variety rhododendrons, their only crop. Then the little modest cape with a big maple tree in the front that looks like it would be heavenly to sit under on a day like this. At the trunk of the tree, the kindly owners have set a steel bowl with ice and water meant as unattended generosity for passing dogs dragged out on a painful, panting walk by their dutiful owners. We labor past the duplex, designed to look so postmodern that at first it is difficult to identify the two identical side-by-side porches. One has a swing, and the other a kind of wicker couch filled with pillows. You turn your head slightly, recalling those warm nights of our unfulfilled middle age when we would arise, sleepless before dawn, and agree to meet on our old porch and hold each other to await the coolness of early morning. But on the porch, dawn was always just the whisper of an idea. So to pass the time, we would have our way with each other. The desires of that hour were lovelier than the breeze-borne aroma of lilac in the garden below. The satisfactions all the more complete, knowing that our pleasures were what made the sun hasten back from its last responsibilities in a darkening Orient. But so far, our walk has been in silence, and I begin to wonder. Now, here's a blue house, 2 stories with white shutters and a white door. The paint is cracked and peeling in a few places. The small, messy patch of green in the front could be grass, or maybe alien-looking weeds from Mars. I can see small, barren mumps of brown in a few places, and beneath a dirt-streaked 6/6 bay window droop sad, untrimmed hedges. I've never liked this house, but you must, because you stop again. The heat radiating from the asphalt roadway turns this into a not romantic moment, and I wish I were back in my bed with you sitting on the corner. Why did you stop? I glance at the window. Through the bottom panes, I can make out a piano and a woman seated, playing, her arms all business, hands floating north and south like an exotic snake charmer, enticing the music out of that old instrument. You raise one finger that says, "Stop and listen." And then I can hear it, or see it rather, a case of synesthesia. Notes extend out from the house and collect around your head in wisps of cerulean blue and razzmatazz pink, periwinkle and Spanish fandango. Walking with Brahms, you are mine once again. The house disappears. Walls and windows, shutters, hedges, grass, vanished. Only the piano and you. I am still standing behind you, but now you are at work, bent very slightly, focused first on your left hand, then on your right, and then back again. Up and down your arms move with the grace of painted animals on a carnival carousel. And I remember my dream. I watch your fingers touch the music and wonder how such a thing is possible. I want you to stop because I cannot withstand the onslaught, but you don't stop. I am pierced with shards of sound, harmonic arrows of loss. And still you play, because Brahms does not allow for stopping until the end. Then at the end, exhausted, you do stop, not moving until the hopeless fading of the last vibration, of the last note of the end of the world. With an unbearable sigh, you lower your hands, placing them back in your lap, and turn to me. And then, for this instant that lasts an eternity, there is your face, plain as memory, plain as day.
The shock of the first kiss comes not at the beginning, but at the end. Separation creates a tiny millimeter of empty space, but the entanglement remains. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein once mused, although of course he was speaking about quantum nonsense. A kiss may or may not be quantum. Einstein was never very clear on this point. Lips are disengaged, and right away there is only room for confusion. What was that? Geolocational uncertainty. Now, do I retreat or advance? Awkwardness. His nose is very large. Guilt. My husband. Anxiety about the timeline. What do I do now? Wondering. I am imprisoned. Is he also? And finally, and most important, there is the desire. Overwhelming, uncontrollable desire. Two particles with opposite spins only needing to reunite, push my lips to his again, to trade a bit of my soul for a bit of his, and thereby pass the event horizon and understand we can never return. I suspect the universe considers falling into a black hole and falling in love to be pretty much the same thing. But again, Einstein offers no guidance on this matter. My name is Claire, and the first time I kissed John, it was inside the partially opened entrance to my apartment on Schönleinstrasse in Berlin, the city of my birth. Later, on my unmade bed, amidst my usual clutter of books and papers and generally unnoticed bric-a-brac, we took off our clothes and sat next to each other, only our knees touching. John felt, I suppose, that this was a good way to avoid the panic of discovering somewhere around lovemaking first intermission what even the most passionately lustful activity cannot forever hide, such as the nose situation I mentioned previously. That our unclothed bodies are not the plush, godlike accumulations of flesh that painters like Goya and Rubens, two of my favorites, by the way, seemed to see when they put their brushes to canvas. However, most often at such times, the sense of touch trumps all the other senses, hands down. So it was with John and me that first night. Having lived for almost half a century, I knew how to fit the parts together in a reasonably effective way. And may I now shift the metaphor, since Einstein was also a very good violinist? Because I was at that time an accomplished pianist, I had a firm grasp of tempos and rhythms. so I paid close attention to the time signature of our breathing. My fingers moved with assurance across this keyboard of pleasure so that all the crescendos and sforzandos rose up at the proper moments. John was also an amateur pianist, although not quite as good as I was. So with the final beat, those longing chords reached their resolution, particularly in our hearts. Goya and Rubens would have been proud. Afterwards, passion turned to joyful relief, and so I was not unduly troubled by the realization that I was in love with two different men.
Two months after Robert's death, Claire and I decide to take a trip to Vienna for the weekend. From the beginning, the three of us agreed that we loved the music of Johannes Brahms, although I was unsure what that meant. Now I think I might understand better by visiting the home of the great composer. I don't know what Claire thinks. As composer and historian Jan Swafford wrote in his brilliant biography of Brahms, quote, "Certainly the temper of Vienna appealed to Johannes as much as its music. The city that loved rib-sticking food and wine made to be drunk in quantity, the atmosphere of romance, the ongoing intellectual and artistic and political debates of the coffee houses. And in the Vienna woods, the gardens of the little Heuriger taverns, surrounded by vineyards and serving endless mugs of new wine. And everywhere, music lilting and bittersweet when it needed to be, incomparably magnificent when it needed to be. The city suited Brahms for those reasons, and deeper ones. More and more, as 19th century Romanticism slipped toward decadence and denouement, a melancholy prowled beneath the gay mirage of life and art in the theaters and cafes and streets. The quintessential Viennese playwright Nestroy wrote, "The noblest of all nations is resignation." The sentiment characterized the place. The gaiety of Vienna was a mask, and Brahms understood masks. Unquote. For all the time that Robert fought the raging of his illness, Claire had donned one mask after another, not because she chose to, but because she had to. The mask of courage to hide her fear, the mask of strength to hide her exhaustion, and the frigid mask of indifference to hide her love for a man who increasingly could not remember who she was. It's only in death that we remove our masks and reveal our true face. I'm sure of that. So we do not go to Vienna as tourists. We go there on business, desperate to find who we might be now that our three-body problem has suddenly become a hazy, confusing duality. Two people immersed in love and excruciating pain in roughly equal measure. For better or for worse, Brahms will have to be my guide. As he was my guide, so many nights I came to dine with Robert and Claire in their strange, rambling house, uneasily situated on a busy suburban street outside of Cleveland, Ohio. There, in the sprawling living room, surrounded by too much glass and too little peace, sat two grand pianos, one black, the other brown. The keyboards were arranged side by side, and at first glance, it looked like there was only one instrument with 176 keys. More than enough. After dinner, as was their habit, my hosts sat at the pianos and played. One evening, they ventured to read through a transcription of the E minor symphony, the very music you're hearing now, the very music that I hear every night. The very music that forces me to remember my dead friend and fall in love with his wife. Now in Vienna, the city built purely of music and 19th century middle-class dreams, we have come to the hallowed Musikverein to hear the composer's great Fourth Symphony. We sit, and I turn around to see the balcony filled with sad specters returning from their silent purgatory of deathly oblivion to await the opening chords. As I await, as we all do. Swafford writes, "The minor chords that drive the symphony to its end reeled to their final E minor shout, and the Viennese leaped to their feet. From audience and orchestra together, a hysterical bellowing and clapping erupted, an ovation like none ever heard before in the Golden Hall. Hundreds of eyes rose past the shimmering caryatids to the balcony where the little figure stood in the director's box. They cried out as if they could bring him back to life, revive him, and what he embodied to them and to the world. Everyone in town had heard the rumor, but for most of the audience, it was the first confirmation. Brahms was dying, and they could see it all over him. He had risen to acknowledge the applause after each movement of this, his last symphony. And everyone had looked up with a shudder, and the grieving had built through the course of the stark, sorrowful work until this explosion at the end. Brahms stood in the box, leaning on the balustrade, with tears pouring down his face. For once, he did not try to hide them. The sight of him was terrible, unbelievable to the Viennese. The little husky figure had bustled through the streets of the city for as long as most of this audience could remember, had stood before them in countless performances. Now he stood before the tumultuous crowd at the Musikverein, shrunken and trembling, the hair and famous beard stringy, eyes yellow, face sickly brown and gaunt, under the sheen of tears. The ovation roared on and on until it became almost unbearable for the audience and for Brahms. Most of them must have been thinking, this wild hurrah for the Fourth Symphony of all things, which had always been too gloomy and austere for the Viennese. On this night, it was not for this symphony they shouted. They cried out for all the music and for the man, for Brahms, who was dying, and with him an age. He had vanished from the streets months earlier, now and then struggling out to a concert or a dinner with one of the eminent families that had adopted him. Now he spent much of his time sitting at home by the window, looking out at the looming dome of the Karlskirche across the street and beyond it to the gaslit park and the River Wien, and to this hall, the Musikverein, where for 25 years he had seen failures and triumphs in succession, and had loved it all, and loved the fickle, cynical, inexplicable people who had made music the town's glory, and its music the glory of the world. Finally, exhausted, the crowd stuttered to silence, and hundreds of eyes turned away in sorrow. Brahms still stood uncertainly in the director's box. Someone handed him his coat and bowler hat, wary of his bark if they offered to take his arm and help him down the stairs. He made his way backstage to thank the director and players, and then accepted a carriage home. A year before, he would have scorned such laziness. After so many concerts, he had walked home alone across the Elizabeth Bridge and the Wrestle Park, past the Karlskirche, to his 3 plain rooms with rented furniture. Now, leaving the carriage and solicitous friends with a gruff adieu, he pulled himself up the 3 flights of stairs. Maybe once more before bed, as Frau Truxa helped him with his coat, he glanced through the big windows to the silhouette of the great dome he had seen most days for 24 years, all the while calling himself a vagabond in the wilderness of the world. Unquote. I turned back around and glanced at Claire, and full of grief, took her hand. It was icy cold.
One, two, three, four. first one. No, never mind one. Thought experiment. In my dining room, there's an old oak sideboard. I put 2 plates on it. Nothing else, just 2 plates. I can immediately recognize that there are 2 plates. I just know. I never count 1, 2. It's obvious. Now 3. The same thing applies. Down the street, there's a house with 3 trees standing in the middle of the front yard. There are no other trees around. I don't need to count them either. That there are 3 is just as intuitive as if there were 2. And finally, 4. This is interesting. One morning, I place 2 pairs of socks on my bed. If they're evenly spaced, I once again realize, without counting, mind you, that there are 4 socks on the bed. However, if the socks are organized into pairs, 2 socks together and 2 more socks together, I instantly understand that I'm looking at 2 groups of socks. Here is my 2 recognition sense working. The closer inspection reveals that each group of socks includes 2 individual socks. Now, instead of using my built-in 4 sense, I use 2 senses, one after the other. Counting the socks is still unnecessary. I have a different understanding. End of thought experiment. One afternoon, my husband brought a new acquaintance to our house to join us for dinner. Robert had met John at a symposium a few weeks earlier, where they had struck up a conversation. John shared many of our interests, said Robert, and he was a brilliant young man, a forward-thinking man, and it would be good for me to meet him. He thought we might become friends. This was typical. Robert had a knack for seeing the future and then figuring out how to get there. Sometimes he made the impossible happen, and many people respected him for that. And sometimes he found people who shared his vision, his insistence on the new over the old. How could I have known? But I think Robert did. In fact, John was brilliant. And of course, Robert had this ability to fall in love with people of intellectual brilliance who could do what he felt he could not. And sometimes those people would fall in love with him. I was not the first to be caught in Robert's web, spun with threads of creative intensity woven with others of bottomless emotional need. I was not the first, nor was I the last. I won't bore you with details of our history before that afternoon. Just know that we were two, Robert and I. It was obvious to everyone. No one needed to count to realize that. But then, so long ago in our suburban glass house in Ohio, John appeared, and two became three. After a while, after eating and drinking, after talking and laughing, and finally discovering that we all shared the same passion for amateur music making, we moved from the table to the big room with the two pianos, and Robert and I both fell in love with our new brilliant friend. There was a book on the piano containing Brahms' Opus 39 waltzes for piano, 4 hands. Robert had just brought the music home the day before, and so that night, that strange night, we decided to play through all 16, taking turns 2 by 2 on the bench. And while we did, we could think about 19th century Vienna, where these waltzes were written, and the romance of the simple and direct, since that's exactly what this music was meant to be. Brahms' great gift to amateur musicians. Piano 4 hands means the following. 2 people sit on the same bench and play on the same keyboard, sharing 88 keys among their 4 hands, 2 hands apiece. Besides making love, there's nothing more intimate than sharing a piano. Due to the physical dimensions of the keyboard, the 2 players must sit very close to each other. The music requires their bodies to constantly be in contact, pushing, bumping, overlapping, more so if the bench isn't quite long enough. Bodies in contact, the first requirement of intimacy. The 2 players will have to share the piano keyboard, but it doesn't divide up equally, 44 and 44. The person on the left-hand side, tenor and bass, will often need to reach for some notes outside of the territory on the right-hand side. And equally, the player on the right, alto and soprano, must occasionally reach for some keys in the lower registers. Hands will need to go over or under other hands. Without, and at times even with careful choreography, they will fumble or tangle. Fingers will move in and out among other fingers. Sometimes players might become confused. Which are their hands and which are their partners? They will have to share. And since fingers are the erotic agents of lovemaking, the second requirement of intimacy is satisfied. And finally, the 2 players will need to hear the music the same way in order to be successful. Such a commitment must be made to ensure that the entire project is successful. Without this commitment, there can be no music, no passion, no love. The final requirement. When all goes right, 4-handed music becomes the romantic ideal, the romance of the 2. But wait, 2 people, 4 hands, 1 keyboard. There remains the strangest number, the outlier, the exotic, immediately apprehended, but never quite comprehended. 3, of course. Regrettably, nature did not provide human beings with 3 of anything. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 kidneys, for God's sake. 10 fingers. You can't even divide 10 by 3. And yet, there was always a simple solution to the problem, a thrilling solution, an obvious solution. A waltz. 3 beats to a measure, 3 steps to a measure. Pulse, step, step, pulse, step, step. 2 becomes 3. So there we were, the 3 of us. My simple song became a pleasant waltz that I thought would last forever. But it did not.
Jorge Luis Borges writes, "Being with you and not being with you is the only way I have to measure time." 1. Yesterday, we took a walk on a frigid winter afternoon holding gloved hands, more from habit than any necessity. 2. Yesterday, you came into the bedroom and pulled open the blinds to remind me that it was time to get up, that it was a sunny spring morning and one must not sleep late in the spring. 3. Yesterday, you marched into the kitchen and said, "It is autumn and I love you," in a voice that was only half joking, because from the beginning, we always knew that such a statement belonged to harebrained romantic movies when one character is hopelessly trying to apologize for some heartless, thoughtless mistake made to advance the plot. Yesterday. 4. Today. Today is heady summer, when blades of grass grow highest and we hold each other in the yard, anticipating the grand panoply of a thunderstorm blackening the horizon down the street. Time doesn't pass. No, not correct. Time doesn't exist. It's an illusion. Of course, we can't be humans and live human lives and grieve human deaths without the assumption of time. But with each beat, we misperceive and misunderstand what it means to grow old and lose what we desire most. Perhaps we should not have returned to the house in Ohio with the glass walls and the side-by-side pianos. We stayed away after your husband died. And here I am, trying to think of a more elegant word for that awful thing that happened. But I can't. And I don't really want to. We made love on that rumpled bed in the tiny flat in Berlin, and then Robert died. And we weren't there. We thought we could escape the grief, but it stuck to both of us. It bathed our skin and infused our clothes. Grief smells to high heaven, and nothing can wash away the odor. Best to just pack up and return home. Lean into it. Face the ghosts. Give in to the terrible magic. And eventually, sadness and loss will harden into some inert substance, like a rock that we put on the bookshelf next to the pianos. Grief will always be there, of course, but at least we can stop grieving over it. That's what time does, you know. However, As I mentioned earlier, time is an illusion. So whatever Claire and I gained was offset by what we lost. The equation balances. The tyranny of the equal sign, that's also what time does. Many weeks, when I was not traveling or did not have a work meeting, I would go to the supermarket to buy groceries. Normally, I just bought food for the two of us, unless we were entertaining, which we did infrequently. Don't get me wrong, we would occasionally host an odd dinner party or a Christmas brunch or a picnic with neighbors. We were not unsociable people. My shopping day was Tuesday. There is solid scientific evidence that Tuesday is the best day to go grocery shopping. And I once said that to Claire, which caused her to burst into laughter several times in the days following. Silly man, she said. Silly man. It's not that she didn't believe in science. She simply felt that she was an artist, and as an artist, she had to parcel out her trust carefully. She would point out that the predictions of science were usually at odds with what she could plainly see was the case. Things like Schrodinger's cat or that bumblebees should not be able to fly. She had never been acquainted with a cat that was neither alive nor dead. And in our garden, she often watched bees that had absolutely no trouble negotiating a flight plan from one flower to another. QED. Claire never went to the grocery store. She grew up in a time and place in which American-style supermarkets did not exist, and she found the orderly vastness of soup cans and yogurt and artificially flavored potato chips both terrifying and ridiculous. But I always felt comfortable walking those aisles, lined in checkerboard linoleum, and listening without much attention to the barely perceptible old pop songs oozing out of the ceiling. And to tell the truth, I liked chatting with old women who were stricken with osteo whatever, and who invariably asked me to reach that one box of cereal on the top shelf because I am both friendly and unusually tall. This for me was a happy adventure. One Tuesday, pushing my shopping cart across the parking lot, I heard the faint strains of some familiar melody hovering in the air, or perhaps coming up through the dull gray asphalt. A violin. Unnatural, electrical, but familiar. A normal activity on a normal day turned curious. Inexplicable. I got in my car and drove toward the sound. And there, in a far corner of the lot on a tiny patch of grass and weeds, stood a young man playing a strange sort of instrument, a violin-shaped thing having only the outline of a violin. It sat lightly under his chin and was plugged into an old amplifier. He stood in front of a small table, holding a knobby device obviously meant to provide recorded accompaniment. On the ground, he had placed a sign that read, "I have 3 young children who sometimes go hungry. Can you help me?" sign of desperation, world-weary resolve. I felt the man's profound courage, and suddenly I thought maybe he was my old friend Robert, returning with a message from whatever infinite idol the blessed dead inhabit. The violinist wore a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. His face was covered in stubble, but his long gray-stained hair was well kept. And as he played, he closed his eyes, his body giving in to the music's beckoning. I stopped and rolled down my window. The man kept playing and looked at me with a terrible understanding. This wasn't Robert, but a shadow from before memory even existed. A little patch of grass transposed before my eyes and became the grieving little park in Vienna across from the Musikverein. I remembered sitting on a bench underneath the famous stone monument to a great composer. And then, unaccountably, I could not stop my tears. There on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my car in a stupid supermarket parking lot. Love and loss descended like a welcoming fog, turning the forgotten corner of that supremely banal suburban landscape into an old, sad garden. I wanted to stay forever in a reverie I had not summoned, but instead I fished $10 out of my wallet and handed it to the man. He stopped playing for a second, took the crumpled bill and nodded. "Brahms," he said quietly, and continued to play. When I arrived home, I found Claire at the piano, her back to me, her long silver hair reflecting the noontime sunlight filling the great room, her hands traveling with lovely deliberation up and down the keys. I waited until the last note of the piece died away. Then, as she did so many times before, she turned to me and placed her hands on her lap. "Brahms," she said quietly. And seeing her face there,
Not everything is a story. Not love, not grief, not anything of value, really. That's what Robert told me one night in the distant past. And whatever we say here, once we speak, whatever we say belongs to the past. But that's just the human condition. Once, in our bedroom, very early while it was still dark, I awoke from a fitful sleep. No, I wasn't awake. I was in the place between, no place. I could see, or I thought I could see, the faintest glow outside, a prayer for morning. Robert stood in front of the window, naked and as still as if sculpted in marble. I was not alarmed. Maybe I was dreaming. It was hard to tell because what's the difference between dreaming and not dreaming? I am in no place, and time has evaporated without a trace, he said softly.
Und öffnet dir. Ich erwach und weine bitterlich, sterben müssen. Eine andere wirst du küssen. Wenn ich bleich und kalt,
What's the matter? I asked him. You are sad. You have been here before. And he replied, No, I have not been here. And in the beginning I was sad, but no longer. Something else, a dream in which I was overcome. Even now, I feel I am unable. Close your eyes, I said. Morning will come, as it always does. Still, Robert did not move and continued to gaze at me, or through me. He said, "I have to see whatever light there will be. I have to see if morning will come." There was silence, not empty, more like a rest before a melancholy musical phrase, full, gathering strength for the next measure. And then he said, "Do you know what love is, or grief? Everything is a wordless, timeless condition, emotions without distinction, or perhaps just, do you recognize me?" I said suddenly. I was unsure. Robert smiled, an unexpected transposition. "Yes, that part of you that is me." "Will you come back to bed?" I pleaded. "No, not now," he said it abruptly. And then I could not think of what to say, so I said the only thing that is ever left to say. "I love you." A terrible storm broke across his face. "Tell me what that is," he demanded. I felt compelled to answer. I had to begin somewhere, so I began. "It is when the storm continued to rage." "No, not when. What? Tell me what love is. Can you do that?" "I can't," I replied. And then, these are the words that Robert put to me, there, waiting for morning. "In my dream, there was this state of affairs. It just was the case. I cried without any reason because there wasn't any reason. And I asked myself, do I know what love is? Then I came to this realization. Love doesn't mean anything, because to have meaning, one has to be able to say what love is, and no one can say that. No one." Robert hesitated, as he often did before launching into an explanation of this or that obscure thing. He knew I would always listen, if not out of interest, then out of love. But this time was different. He began, "Words are thoughts, my love, one and the same, identical. We don't attach words to our thoughts. You think we do, but we don't. As if thoughts are some strange, ghostly little songbirds flittering through the ether that we try to capture in a cage of words, a cage that will bring understanding. And the domain of speaking, of thinking, is time, was, is, will be, past, present, future, cause and effect. We live in a house with clocks on every wall, and we cannot leave, otherwise we wouldn't be human. But love, or grief, or joy, or melancholy, or any emotion, they are not words, they are not stories, not cause and effect. They don't recognize the passing of time. They only exist now. So we can't possibly understand anything essential, because to understand would be to describe, and to describe would be to speak, and we can only speak in tenses: simple past, present perfect, future progressive. Was, is, will be, only speak in time. Of course, you know that. How we arrive at love? Well, that might be a story, but it's useless. In my dream, there was no story. Not was, nor is, nor certainly will be. At first, my dream brought me unbearable sadness. I must have become sad in the past, and I assumed that perhaps I would still be sad in the future, but the future is mysterious, so who knows? Then, so quietly that I barely noticed it, my dream became a beautiful song, and my sadness evaporated like the morning mist.
Zieht es mir leise durch den Sinn, wie Frühlingsblumen blüht es und schwebt mit Duft dahin.
Robert seemed to sigh, and then, sotto voce, he said, "Pay no attention to the past, my dearest. It is immutable. And don't pay attention to the future. It is empty. Only listen to the present, that special part of time that truly belongs to us. That part of time we cannot know, only feel. That part of us that is music. That part of us that is love. With music, nothing happens, but we are forever changed. This was my dream." He stopped, bowed his head, and surrendered to me. "Come back to bed, my love," I said through my tears.
I am an old man in an old city. I walk on cobbled sidewalks, bruised and beaten by centuries of sadness. Ancient trees shading apothecaries and booksellers. Streets of pain and surprise and exhaustion and joy. People sit everywhere. They drink and eat, argue and compromise. Stirring their coffee, they read and love and try to avoid the abject cruelty of history, or maybe embrace it. They are the not-so-great movers and shakers, Marxists and fascists, beggars and accountants, stealthy graffiti artists and brash confidence men, lawyers, bakers, and yellow-vested street workers, mothers and children, philosophers, Anatolians and East Indians and Africans, the whole world passing. Such is the business of an old city, and it goes about its business, grinding its remembrances of horror with the quiet grit of human existence. A man in a brown suit rides a bicycle with a briefcase under his arm. Two police officers chat on the corner. Boys with bulging biceps pound flour into Turkish flatbread to sell later in the afternoon. Women with their heads covered in radiant silk scarves laugh over a cappuccino outside a tiny cafe. A figure bent under an enormous backpack stands reading a sign in a vintage clothing store. An infinity of people that make a city what it has been and must always be. Here is a tableau of the everyday. A small Persian rug hung over a railing to dry. Across the street, a darkened courtyard filled with bicycles and trash cans. On the corner, a lovely Art Nouveau residence offering sculptures of unsaintly women, bare-breasted and smiling, determined to ignore or forget the inhumanity of a century they could not have imagined when they were first brought into this world. And once again, not so long ago, you were part of this, and for that, I was in love with you. Returning now, I suddenly realized my stupidity. We humans always make the same mistake. Memories, barely tainted by facts, are creations of the soul, but instead we treat them like little YouTube videos, snippets, recordings of exactly what happened, created by some weird kind of mind cam. We just file them away so we can access them when we want to or need to, so we can play them back, stopping here and there to study or analyze or contextualize or judge, to make ourselves feel better or worse. I know this can't be right. A better metaphor goes this way. Memories are like vines, living things that sprout and grow when you're not paying attention to them. They get long and tangled, and they ensnare other memories, and disparate memories get tangled together, violating the cause and effect of a timeline we wrongly assume to be inevitable. At some point, the memory vines become noticeably out of control, and they demand our attention. But instead of pruning them back, which would be sensible, we just look at them and think, well, that's simply the way it was. That's exactly how it happened. And because that's not exactly how it happened, however it did happen, we always discover the sadness of our years. Now I am forever walking down streets lined with apartment buildings, underneath balconies verdant with potted trees and plants, deep, dark jungles, 5 feet wide by 2 feet deep, and occasionally pouring over the wrought iron are the very same vines I came to find, to reclaim if I can, but the effort is pointless. You are not here, and the old city hesitates, smiles gently in sympathy, and once more goes about its business.